Hello and welcome to XO Safety. My name is Jeremy and I'll be your guide on the magical journey that we call hazard communication. Now, hazard communication is the method by which employers communicate the hazards of chemicals to employees, and year after year it is the #1 OSHA violation. But fear not, we've put together a great step-by-step guide that provides everything you need to comply with hazard communication regulations. Now, before we get started, I recommend a couple of things. First, download the OSHA Hazard Communication Small Entity Compliance Guide. It's a terrific resource. It's got all the regulations and information that you need, and most importantly, it's free. You can find it right here at the top of the webpage. And I also recommend Affordable Safety Training's Hazard Communication DVD Compliance Kit. It's got all the training materials you need. It's got a written HazCom template, associated forms. It's a real time saver. And of course, everything you need is located right here at this website. So, let's get started. Okay, so the first step is to identify a responsible party for your hazard communication program. This is going to be the person that implements and oversees the program. Now, ideally, this should be somebody with some sort of supervisory authority, somebody that understands the hazards of the chemicals in the workplace and has the authority to direct employees and correct whatever issues they may find. Now, I'm guessing since you're watching this video that that person is most likely going to be you. However, if it's not you, go grab that person and bring them on down to xosafety.com/HazCom so we can go over this together. Once you've identified that responsible party, then we need to go over the regulations. Now, the federal regulations are 29 CFR 1910.1200 hazard communication. Now, a lot of states have their own OSHA safety plans, but hazard communication has some requirements in it that apply to everyone, and so each state pretty much has each state with their own safety program is pretty much identical to the federal standard. You can find the regulations here on the website, and also don't forget to check out the Small Entity Compliance Guide, which has great information as well. So once you've gone and looked at those regulations and read through the compliance guide, we're ready to move on to the next step. Okay, so you've identified your responsible party and you've reviewed the regulations. The next step is to write a written hazard communication program. The written hazard communication program, the purpose of it is just a policy document that you use to inform your employees how you'll be communicating the hazards of the chemicals in the workplace. Nothing more. It doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be complicated. If it sounds like it's written by lawyers or it's written for lawyers, it's probably not really the most effective program. The first step to writing a hazard communication program is you have to take a chemical inventory. Now, a chemical inventory is simply a record of all the chemicals that you have on site. When you're writing down the chemical inventory, you need to make sure that you write down the product identifier on the label. The product identifier on the label must be on the label, and it also must match the product identifier on the safety data sheet so that in the future when employees are trying to cross-reference the two, they'll all match. When you're doing a chemical inventory, this is a great time to do some housekeeping. Take a look at the chemicals, pick them up off the shelf. There's a little brown ring around the bottom of the can. It probably means it hasn't been moved in a couple of years. And if it hasn't been moved in a couple of years, it hasn't been used in a couple of years. So get rid of it, right? You don't need to have it around. The more chemicals you have on site, the more hazards you have on site, the more things that it can burn, the more labeling requirements you have, the more safety data sheet requirements you have. Just makes things easier to make sure that the chemicals that are on site are required for work and not just there taking up space. Another thing I highly recommend while you're doing the chemical inventory is to make note of the hazard warnings that exist on the current label on the chemicals. Does it have pictograms? Does it have a hazard statement, a precautionary statement, maybe first aid? Whatever's on there, make a quick note of it, and it'll turn out to be really useful in the next step when it comes to chemical labeling. So take a walk around and look at all those chemicals and make sure you get a good and accurate chemical inventory. All right, so you've completed your chemical inventory. Now it's time to move on to the written hazard communication program. We've got some great options right here on the site. There is a free hazard communication template you can download. There's one in the OSHA Hazard Communication Small Entity Compliance Guide that I mentioned. There's also one included in the Affordable Safety Training Hazard Communication DVD Compliance Kit that I recommended. So lots of great options. But remember, this is a policy document for your employees. It doesn't need to be long. You don't need to restate all the regulations from OSHA. Just keep it simple. The written hazard communication program needs the chemical inventory, the chemical labeling methods, the location of the safety data sheets, the methods for informing and training employees of chemical hazards, how employees are informed of hazardous non-routine tasks, and how employees are informed of the chemicals in unlabeled pipes. That's it. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. Now, if you're on a site with multiple employers, one additional requirement is that you need to mention how you will be communicating and coordinating the hazard communication programs between the different employers. We've actually got a great option for a hazard communication program. Instead of just keeping it away in a file folder somewhere, you can put it right up there on the wall. We've got a great hazard communication program poster that meets OSHA requirements. Just post it on the wall, fill it out with a Sharpie, and have all your employees sign it, and you've got a great awareness tool, and you've got a safety plane that's right there and visible for everybody. So now we have to make sure all the chemicals in the workplace are properly labeled. Now, there's a lot of confusion out there about what actually has to be on the label. So we're going to break it down by chemical container type. There's three main types of chemical containers. There's shipping containers, there's workplace containers, sometimes called secondary containers, and there's portable containers. So let's look at the labeling requirements for each of these three containers. And the first type of a container is a shipping container. Chemical shipping containers are what the new Global Harmonized Standard regulations apply to when it comes to labeling chemicals. A shipping container is a box that you would load in some chemicals and ship it off to a customer or receive it from another facility. Shipping containers, they go in transit. GHS has a lot of specific requirements. There's actually 6. They have to have the product identifier, which matches the name on the chemical inventory and the safety data sheet. They need to have the signal word, which is either danger or caution. They need to have the hazard statement, precautionary statements, relevant pictograms as established by GHS, and then the manufacturing contact information. So that's 6 items, and it's quite a bit of information. Now, there's probably a good chance that you actually don't have shipping containers at your facility at all. If you go to Home Depot to pick up your chemicals or down to the paint supply store, there's a good chance that you're not going to have any chemical shipping containers at all at your facility. Chemical shipping containers that have those GHS requirements are, like I said, stuff that gets shipped to and from a location. So workplace containers are just the containers that chemicals are in the workplace. They're sometimes called secondary containers. Now, workplace containers also have to be labeled, and OSHA gives you 2 options as to what you can put on those labels. The first option is just to use all the information that was on the chemical shipping container, the GHS labels with the 6 items that we spelled out. Now, that's easy to do as far as knowing what needs to go on the label. It can be difficult because it's a lot of information, and especially if you have like a small container, it's difficult to get all that information on there. But OSHA gives you another option. They say that you can make a custom labeling system at your facility. Now, the only thing that OSHA says that specifically has to be on the label is the product identifier, and that product identifier must match the safety data sheet and the chemical inventory. And then OSHA says you just need other stuff. Now, it doesn't actually say other stuff in the regulations. There's a very long and legal statement about what it needs to be, but it's basically saying that you put the product identifier on the label, and then enough information on there, when combined with that label and the safety data sheets and the training, communicates the hazards to the employees. So you can create a custom labeling system. Remember back when we were doing the chemical inventory and I said, hey, take a note of what hazard warnings are on those chemicals. And this is why I did that. So if you look at your list and see what all of your chemicals have in common, you can say, all right, this is my labeling system. And then you don't need to go back and relabel all the chemicals. In my experience, I find that the thing that's on just about every single chemical is the product identifier, a hazard statement, first aid, and required personal protective equipment. It's usually on everything. So if you write that up and say, these are the items that are going to be on my custom labeling system, you don't have to go back out there and relabel everything. The only thing you need to do is if you do find some chemicals that are missing one of those items, you're going to need to make a custom label for that one and affix it to the chemical. But for the most part, you'll be good to go without having to do any additional work or buy any additional labels. Now, there is a third type of chemical container in the workplace, and that's what they call portable containers. Now, portable containers, provided they meet some very specific requirements, do not actually require labels. A portable container is something that you fill with a chemical, you go off and you use it, and you come back and you put it back to where you found it. An example of that is filling like a paint tin with paint, filling a spray bottle with some sort of chemical cleaner, and so on. So When you're using a portable container, if the person who is filling the portable container fills it from a properly labeled source, and they maintain control of that portable container throughout the entire time that it's being used, doesn't have to be labeled. However, if that person were to put that container down and walk away from it, they are no longer in control of that container, and then it needs to be labeled. Or if they were to take that container and just hand it to somebody else and say, here you go, use this, if it's not, it needs to be labeled, and if it's not, that's a violation. There are a lot of facilities that just make it a policy that everything has to be labeled, and they don't allow that exception for portable containers, but it's really up to you. OSHA does allow portable containers to go without labeling as long as they're in control of the person who performed the transfer and it's transferred from a properly labeled source. So now let's talk about safety data sheets. Safety data sheets are one of the most important tools an employer has for communicating the hazards of chemicals to employees. These are documents that have broken down into 16 different sections that cover everything from the identity of the chemical to the composition of ingredients, first aid measures in the event of exposure, exposure controls and personal protective equipment, exposure limits, transport information. Basically everything you need to know about working with and protecting yourself from the chemical is included in the safety data sheet. Now in 2012, OSHA updated the Hazard Communication Program and inserted the Global Harmonized Standard. And when they did that, they removed the name material from Material Safety Data Sheet. You may have previously known it as an MSDS or a Material Safety Data Sheet. Now it's just a safety data sheet. So when you're going through yours, if you see the word material in your safety data sheet, you definitely know that that is out of date and it needs to be updated. So look at your chemical inventory and make sure that you have a safety data sheet for every chemical on the list. If you don't have one, usually you can get it from your distributor, or usually just go online and look at the manufacturer's website and they'll have a section for safety data sheets. Once you've obtained all the safety data sheets, you need to make sure that you inform the employees where these safety data sheets are going to be located. You can keep these electronically, that's allowed, but you need to make sure that you have some sort of backup system in case the system goes down and somebody can't access the computer or can't access the website. So really, regardless of what you do, you're going to have a paper hard copy somewhere so that people can access it in the event of some unforeseen emergency. Keep your safety data sheet storage clean and current. It's not meant to be a record of all the chemicals that you once used on the job site. If you're not currently using that chemical on the job site, get that safety data sheet out of the binder. A busy and cluttered binder makes it difficult for people to locate safety data sheets when they need them. If you do have a lot of safety data sheets, consider breaking the safety data sheets out into individual binders and putting them in the workplaces where they're applicable. It'll make it easier for people to access. Now, you've probably seen those yellow safety data sheet binders or the right to know centers that people put on a wall. And those are really helpful for having people informed as to where the safety data sheets are, but they're not required. Really, you just want to go with a method that's easiest to communicate to the employees and it also makes it the most available to them. It's easy to slip up and get behind on safety data sheet management. You get a lot of stuff coming in, you have a lot of safety data sheets to keep track of. So consider checking safety data sheets in part of your regular work procedure. If you're receiving chemicals, maybe consider having that person check the safety data sheet they receive with the shipment against the existing safety data sheet in the binder to make sure that they have the most updated one. It's also a good idea to work in review of safety data sheets into regular company safety meetings. Maybe pull out a safety data sheet during a weekly safety meeting and go over it, or ask an employee some information from the safety data sheet as a knowledge spot check. It's really important to incorporate the management and awareness of safety data sheets into your regular work procedures. Okay, so you've completed the chemical inventory. You've got a written hazard communication program. You've got all your chemical labeling taken care of. All your safety data sheets are collected and available. Now it's time for the employee information and training. Now, OSHA requires that the employer inform employees of the requirements of the Hazard Communication Standard, the use and location of chemicals in the workplace, and the components of your hazard communication program. Now listen up, because this is really important. At some point in this information and training, you are going to have to get a real live human involved. And I'm not knocking safety videos, I'm not knocking online training, they're great, they're a great component of hazard communication training. But at some point, you've got to get a supervisor involved directly with the employees. You can use a safety video or an online course or some other automated thing to cover the requirements of hazard communication. They're the same at every facility. But when it comes to the use of chemicals in the workplace and where they are, you're going to need a supervisor to directly train the employees. And when it comes to the requirements of the company hazard communication program, you're also going to need a supervisor there to go over that with the employees. Now, in addition to informing employees of those requirements, OSHA has some workplace-specific training requirements as well. The first thing is that they have to be trained on the methods to detect the release of hazardous chemicals. Now, in some industrial facilities, there may be alarms or badges or some sort of sensing material that will inform employees, but for the most part, there's nothing specific to that, other than maybe smelling a chemical or seeing that a chemical container has been knocked over. Do you know where a great place is to find this type of information about how to detect the release of chemicals? Exactly right, safety data sheets. So go over the safety data sheets. In addition to detecting the release of hazardous chemicals, OSHA requires employees to be trained on the specific hazards of the chemicals in the workplace. And then in addition to that, they need to be trained on the procedures and equipment that are required to protect themselves from those hazards. So detection of chemical release, the hazards of the chemicals in the workplace, and how they need to protect themselves from those hazards. Like I said again, training videos are great to cover some of this, but it's going to require some hands-on instruction. I'd like to make another quick plug for Affordable Safety Training's Hazard Communication Compliance Kit. Comes with all the training materials you need, DVD, e-learning, PowerPoint to cover the basic requirements. It also has a hands-on certification program, so it'll walk you through the hands-on portion of this training that we discussed. Now, whatever training method you choose, just make sure that you communicate the information. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be an expensive video. You can go through it as a handout, you can go through it just as a regular meeting. But it's really important that you do the training, that you meet those requirements, and then of course you need to document it in writing. Because if you haven't documented it in writing, according to OSHA, it probably didn't happen. All right, all right, all right. Congratulations, you've completed your hazard communication program. You're all up to date. So there's only one more thing to worry about, is you have to do periodic monitoring and analysis of the program. You want to make sure that the program is being executed properly and that employees are following it. So walk around. Are all the chemicals properly labeled? Are the safety data sheets together, available, and being used? Are people familiar with the chemicals they're using? Do they understand the hazards associated with them? Are they using the personal protective equipment that's required in Section 8 of the safety data sheet? Walk around and do a spot check with the employees. Quiz them on basic information. Make sure that they understand it. And then if there's any accidents in the workplace that involve chemicals, make sure you review that accident and compare it to the hazard communication program and see what you can do to update or improve that program to prevent accidents in the future. So, thanks for listening. I hope this was informative. Remember, you can always contact Exo Safety with any questions about hazard communication or really anything. We're here for you. We're excited to interact with our customers. So, thanks for taking the time, and you guys stay safe out there.